The storm rolled over Houston in long, low rumbles that rattled the hospital windows. Rain smeared the city in streaks of neon and brake lights, turning every puddle in the parking lot into a restless mirror. The ambulance lights hit first, spinning red and white across the glass doors of St. Gabriel Medical Center. Then the siren cut out, and the only sound for a beat was rain hammering the awning. The automatic doors parted. 2 paramedics pushed a gurney in hard enough that one wheel squealed. The man on it was big muscles gone slack under a shredded black tactical shirt chest, shining dark where blood had soaked through. There was a trident patch still clinging to his shoulder, torn at one corner, as if something had tried to rip it off. Male mid-30s, GSW, right shoulder with blast involvement vitals tanking. The lead medic called, already breathing hard. Name he gave us is Reddick, Captain United States Navy. The triage nurse hit the code button. A harsh tone stabbed through the emergency department, and the hallway shifted like a muscle tightening. Voices sharpened. Feet moved faster. Someone shoved a curtain aside hard enough that the rings slapped against the metal rail. Grace Holloway was halfway through restocking the supply cart when the alarm sounded. She flinched at the tone, then caught herself and let her shoulders relax. Triage codes were normal on night shift. So were people leaking blood on the floor. She grabbed the last pack of gauze, dropped it into the bin, and nudged the cart back into its bay. Holloway, one of the older nurses, called as she passed. Stick to the easy stuff. If you see anyone with more than a sprained ankle, send them to me. He grinned like it was a joke. Everyone laughed like it was one. Grace gave a quick automatic smile. It slid on and off her face with practiced ease. Her badge swung a little when she turned toward the trauma bays. Grace Holloway, RN, in clean black print with a small red sticker underneath. New staff. The plastic edge tapped softly against her scrub top with each step. She pushed through the line of gurneys waiting in the hall and peeked into Trauma 2 just as the paramedics rolled the new arrival in. The smell hit before the sight did. Copper thick in the air, bleach underneath. Wet wool from rain-soaked uniforms. It bent together into a scent she knew far too well, though she kept her face smooth as she stepped just inside the curtain. What do we got? Someone asked. Captain Noah Reddick, say, the medic repeated. Entry high, exit low, possible shrapnel. Took some kind of blast, lost consciousness in transit. BP 80/50 and falling. We got fluids running, but he needs a miracle or a surgeon. I am the miracle, a voice answered from the far side. Dr. Victor Lang pushed through the crowd at the head of the bed, lab coat open, stethoscope, slung around his neck like a piece of jewelry. He was in his 40s, hair streaked with gray, in deliberate lines, the kind of man who moved like the room belonged to him. Get him on the monitors. I want a CBC type and cross full trauma panel. Respiratory, stay close. We might need to intubate. Hands moved, clips snapped onto pale skin. The heart monitor came alive in bright green spikes, erratic but present. An O2 mask hissed as it settled over Noah's mouth. Someone cut the rest of his shirt cleanly away. Scars mapped his chest, pale lines over old burns, the kind of road map that did not come from bar fights. Grace found herself at the foot of the bed, fingers resting lightly on the metal rail. She watched the blood trickle down his flank and drip onto the sheet. Each drop hit with a tiny, dull sound she heard even through the noise. He was tan under the fluorescent lights, but the tan had gone gray. Sweat rolled down from his hairline into the close-cut beard along his jaw. There was a small tattoo high on his left chest, half hidden under the ECG lid. A simple black bird, wings folded, perched on a branch. Raven. The word skimmed across her mind without permission. Get out of the way, Holloway. The bark snapped her attention back. Dr. Lang was glaring at her over the gurney hands, already in blue gloves. His eyes flicked to her badge, to the red new staff sticker, then back to her face. This is not a first-week case. Go help with sutures or something. Yes, doctor, she said. Her voice came out steady. It always did. She shifted back a step, then another, but she did not leave the doorway. From here she could see without being seen. A blood pressure cuff squealed against Noah's arm. The monitor answered with a soft, insistent beep that sped up, then stuttered. BP 70/40, someone called. Push another bolus, Lang ordered. Has he been sedated? Small dose in the rig, but it barely touched him, the medic answered. I think he was fighting us in his sleep. Grace watched Noah's hand. It lay open on the sheet for a long moment, fingers relaxed. Then they twitched. The tendons in his wrist went sharp. He's stirring, one of the residents said. Good, Lang replied. I want a neurocheck. Reddick, can you hear me, Captain? Open your eyes. For a second, nothing changed. Then Noah's lids fluttered. His eyes opened in a narrow slit, unfocused pupils huge. His gaze swept the room without landing on anything like he was tracking something only he could see. Sir, you are in a hospital, Lang said loud and clear. You are safe. Stay still and let us work. The words bounced off whatever wall Noah had put up in his head. His breathing hitched. The hand on the sheet curled, dragging the fabric into his palm. Muscles jumped along his neck. Grace felt the hair on her arms rise. BP dropping again, the resident said. 60 over 38. Then move faster, Lang snapped. Prep him for surgery. Get consent from whoever has authority if he is not lucid. I am not losing this case. The monitor beeped faster lines, turning jagged. Noah's eyes finally locked on something. Not a person, not a face. A corner of the ceiling where the light fixture hummed and flickered, where the bright rectangle glared down like a searchlight through dust. He sucked in a breath like he had broken the surface of dark water. His entire body tensed under the sheets. Easy, Captain, the respiratory tech said, reaching to adjust the mask on his face. Just breathe with the O2, in and out. You are good. The hand nearest the tech snapped up faster than anyone seemed to expect. Noah knocked the mask away, plastic cracking against the rail. The monitor cables snapped off his chest one by one with small pops. Do not touch me, he choked. The sound was raw, scraped out from behind clenched teeth. His eyes were open now, wide and bright, but they were not really seeing the room. Sweat tracked down his temples, cutting shiny paths through the grime. Grab his shoulders, someone said. 2 nurses moved in at once. They reached for him, hands open. Noah reacted like they had swung weapons. His arm shot out, hitting one nurse in the chest. She stumbled back into the rolling stool, which skidded away and crashed into the supply cart. The other nurse jerked her hands back instinctively. The IV line tore loose, blood streaking across the white sheet. Security, Lang shouted. Now! Grace stepped closer to the doorway without thinking. Her pulse climbed into her throat. The pattern of it matched the chaos in the room, matched the monitor as it flashed warning signs and error messages. Another alarm joined the chorus as the door slammed open. 2 security officers rushed in, belts heavy with radios and plastic restraints. One still held a half-eaten granola bar in his left hand. This guy armed, he asked. Just dangerous, Lang shot back. Get him pinned before he hurts someone. Noah was breathing fast, chest heaving, the muscles in his jaw working like he was chewing on words he refused to spit out. His gaze skimmed over the white coats, the masks, the cameras in the corners, and slid right past Grace's small frame in the doorway. He was not looking for help, he was scanning for exits. The officers closed in, reaching for his wrists. Noah's fingers flexed again, veins standing out along the backs of his hands. The sheet bunched under his grip. His shoulders rolled, testing the limits of the gurney of the people around him. Something in the way his eyes narrowed told Grace exactly what was coming next. Something in the way his eyes narrowed told Grace exactly what was coming next. He was not confused, he was taking inventory. The officers took another step, hands open, palms out, like that would soften the move. Someone at the head of the bed reached for a restraint strap. Noah moved. He bucked his shoulders hard, the gurney shuddering under him. One of the officers grabbed his forearm and got thrown off balance. The other tried to catch his wrist and almost caught his elbow instead. The curtain hooks rattled as the whole bay shook. Stop resisting, the first officer barked. Noah snarled something through his teeth that did not sound like English. It had the clipped rhythm of a radio transmission, syllables crushed close together, code meant to be heard over static. His free hand swung out, knocking an instrument tray sideways. Metal clattered across the floor, scalpels and clamps spinning under shoes. Hold him, Lang shouted. Now! The resident at the foot of the bed reached for Noah's leg. He might as well have tried to grab a live wire. Noah jerked, knee slamming into the rail. The whole gurney slid an inch across the linoleum. The heart monitor lost contact and squealed. The blood pressure machine beeped an error. Oxygen tubing snaked off the side of the bed and dragged along the floor. Grace felt the sound of it in her teeth. She watched Noah's face. His eyes had gone flat and far away. Not empty exactly, focused on something past the ceiling, past the building, past the city. He was not seeing fluorescent light and white tile. She recognized that look. It belonged to people who had the wrong sky in their head. Get a sedative in him, Lang snapped. I cannot get close, the nurse with the syringe called, breathless. The security officer who still held the granola bar dropped it into his pocket and lunged for Noah's shoulder. Noah twisted, broke the grip, and for a split second his hand came up toward the officer's face. Grace moved before she could think about the wisdom of it. She stepped fully into the bay, sliding past a rolling stool and the wrecked instrument tray. Someone shouted her name, but the sound skimmed over her like water. She stopped at the head of the bed, just inside the circle of chaos. Grace, get back, Lang said sharply. You are not cleared for this. She did not answer him. Noah's arm drew back again, muscles bunched along his biceps, knuckles white. His eyes snapped toward the brightest light above the bed as if it was a flare. His breath came in harsh, shallow pulls. For half a second, she saw something else there. Powdery dust. A pale stone ceiling blackened at one corner. Air so hot it burned when you dragged it into your lungs. A helicopter somewhere, you could not see it yet, only hear the rotors pounding at the sky. Her own breath shortened, her fingers curled in. She took one step closer and set her hand flat on the rail by his head. Close enough to feel the heat coming off his skin, far enough that she could pull back if he swung. "Captain Reddick," she said low. "Noah." He did not turn. His gaze darted past her, whipped toward the curtain, then toward the officers. "Do not touch me," he snarled again. The second officer reached for his wrist. Grace did not raise her voice. She aimed it instead, the way she used to aim a light in a blackout forgettable corridor. "Noah." This time she dropped the title. His eyes flicked toward her for a heartbeat. Not focus-only motion. Enough. She bent closer so that the only place for her words to land was his ear. "Raven 3, she murmured. "Echo fall." 6 syllables, smooth and quiet. They fell into the air like a pattern she had not spoken in years. They tasted of sand and metal in her mouth. They did not belong in a clean white room, but here they were sliding out of her anyway. Everything in the bay seemed to hesitate. Noah froze. The next breath stopped halfway in his chest. His fingers loosened grip, slackening on the sheet. His eyes, still wide, snapped away from the light and locked onto her face instead. The officers hung there, hunched in mid-reach. Lang's mouth stayed open around the start of another order. The only thing moving was the heartbeat line on the monitor, trying to make sense of the new contact on his chest. Noah blinked once, a slow, dragging shudder. "Say it again," he rasped. Grace swallowed. Her tongue felt dry and thick. She had to line the words up in her head before she could push them out a second time. "Raven 3, she repeated, tone steady now. "Echo fall." His throat worked. The cords in his neck eased. He stared at her like he was trying to reconcile 2 overlapping images. Up close like this, she could see the small white scar at his hairline, half hidden in his short, dark buzz cut. It was the shape of a crescent, like something had grazed him and kept going. A memory nicked and left behind. "You are not here," she said quietly. "You are not under fire. You are at St. Gabriel, Houston, Texas. Look at me." His gaze sharpened a fraction, some of the haze receding. His chest shook on the exhale. "Doc Holloway," he whispered. It was barely sound, a breath more than a word. Grace felt it all the same. 2 small syllables meeting the 6 she had just used and sliding into place, clicking a lock she had welded shut years ago. No one in this room had ever called her that. "Not here." The nearest resident blinked. Did he just say doctor? Lang shot him a look sharp enough to cut, and then turned it on Grace instead. "What did you just say to him?" he demanded. "What code was that?" Grace did not look away from Noah to answer. "Grab a new line," she said calmly. "And another set of leads. Connect him again gently this time. He is not going to swing at you if you stop treating him like a threat." The officer closest to Noah hesitated. "You sure about that, ma'am?" Noah's hand lay open on the sheet now, fingers still. The tendons had gone from wire tight to merely taut. His shoulders sagged back into the mattress, the brief burst of feral energy drained. He was still breathing fast, but the breaths were less like gasps and more like steady pulls. He was watching Grace as if the rest of the room had gone soft focus. "I am sure," she said. She did not raise her voice with the reply. The certainty in it did the work instead. Slowly, the officer let go of Noah's forearm. The other eased his grip on the opposite wrist. No new punches flew, no new kicks landed. The room began to move again. A nurse stepped forward with fresh ECG leads. Her hands shook a little at first. Grace shifted her position a few inches, placing herself where Noah had to look through her to see the nurse. "Eyes on me," she told him. He obeyed. The nurse stuck the leads back on. The monitor beeped, searching, then caught the rhythm again. Not pretty, not regular, but there. An oxygen mask hovered near the bed. "No mask yet," Grace said. "Nasal cannula first. Give him air without covering his face." Lang stared at her. "This is my trauma bay, Nurse Holloway," he snapped. "You do not come in here and start giving orders based on some mystery phrase and a hunch." Grace finally glanced at him. "Then order it yourself," she said. "You want him calm, you do not strap plastic over half his face right after he ripped it off." Lang opened his mouth, then closed it again. His eyes flicked back to Noah, who watched the exchange with a faint, exhausted awareness. The respiratory tech was already switching out the equipment. Soft prongs slid under Noah's nose, the tubing looped over his ears instead of across his mouth. The monitor numbers climbed a notch. Noah swallowed, throat bobbing. His gaze had cleared enough now that she could see the struggle to stay present in it the way each second took effort. "Is it really you?" he asked. There was no rank in the question, no protocol, only the disbelieving edge of someone who had already buried the person he was looking at. Grace felt her mouth go dry. For a second, she wanted to look over her shoulder and check if there was someone else behind her, with the same last name, the same history, the same ghost. She did not. "It is me," she said. Her voice did not shake. That surprised her more than anything Noah had done so far. Silence pressed in, at the edges of the bay. Even the usual background noise of the ER seemed to dim. Conversations in other rooms dropped in volume, as if the rest of the department were leaning without meaning to. Someone near the curtain whispered, he knows her. Another voice replied even softer, thought she was new. Noah closed his eyes for one long breath, then opened them again. When he spoke next, the words came out rough from strain. You pulled us off that roof, he said. Valley east of the river, night glass. They said you never made it to the convoy. Grace's fingers tightened on the rail. She felt the metal bite into her palm, grounding. Heat flared briefly under her ribs and then cooled into a solid weight. We are not talking about that, she told him. The line of his mouth twitched. He accepted the deflection the way soldiers accepted bad weather. Not happily, not fully, but with the understanding that arguing would not move it. He let his head sink back into the pillow, eyes still on her. Around the bed, the staff returned to their tasks. Someone called out a new blood pressure reading. Another nurse labeled blood vials. The rhythm of the ER reasserted itself, but a step slower, as if everyone were moving carefully around a presence they did not yet understand. Lang stood at the foot of the bed, arms crossed, expression tight. Well, Doc Holloway, he said at last, the title edged with disbelief. Since your magic words seem to have bought us a cooperative patient, perhaps you would like to explain how you know classified-sounding call signs in my emergency department. Grace kept her eyes on Noah a moment longer. He watched her back, a faint spark of something almost like humor at the corner of his gaze, buried under pain and fatigue. She let go of the rail and straightened. I know how to read a wound, she said. Start with that, Dr. Lang. Then we can talk about the rest. For a beat, no one moved. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The monitor clicked and chirped, catching its own breath. Somewhere down the hall, a gurney squeaked, distant and thin. Grace brought her attention back to the present, to the patch of skin and blood that actually mattered. Let me see the wound, she said again, more precise this time. Lang hesitated, then jerked his chin at the nurse nearest the head of the bed. Peel it back. The nurse swallowed and reached for the soaked dressing. Her gloves were already streaked red. She lifted one corner, slowly, careful not to pull any more than she had to. Blood oozed up dark and lazy now instead of spraying. The gauze pulled free with a soft tearing sound. The smell changed, warmer, heavier. Grace stepped closer into the space the nurse had opened. Her world narrowed to a section of shoulder and flank, a path cut through flesh. The entry wound sat high near the front of Noah's right shoulder, ragged around the edges, the skin burned in a speckled, uneven radius. Not a neat circle. Staining spread farther than it should have for a single straight track. The exit wound was lower toward his back, not as large as she would expect if a high-velocity round had simply gone in and out on a clean line. There was a shallow fan of abrasions around it, as if something else had hit at an angle. She could feel Lang's eyes on her cheek, waiting for her to say something wrong. Clean that, she said softly to the nurse, gently. The nurse dabbed at the edges with saline gauze. More of the pattern emerged as the thickest blood lifted away. Grace leaned in. Small, dark specks dotted the surrounding tissue. Different sizes, different depths. Some barely breaking the surface, others buried deeper. She did not have a CT scan yet, but she did not need one to recognize shrapnel when she saw it. Her fingers itched for forceps and a headlamp. Old muscle memory sat up inside her like a patient waking. She listened to it. That is not just a simple gunshot, she said. He took blast. Lang snorted softly. Everyone already heard the medic say there was blast involvement. This is not news, Holloway. She ignored the edge in his voice. Look at the pattern, she said. Entry too shallow for the amount of tissue damage. Exit too narrow for a full round. Secondary abrasions around both. Burn spread, not uniform. She traced the perimeter in the air without touching him, mapping invisible lines. This was fragmentation, concussive. Something exploded, sent metal in at an angle. He did not just get shot, he got caught in the edge of something that wanted to take the whole room. One of the residents shifted closer, curiosity overriding hierarchy. He squinted at the wound, then at the bits of dark embedded in the tissue. So those specks are, he began. Fragments, she said, of casing or walls or whatever was between him and the blast center. Lang's posture softened half an inch despite himself. Fine, he said. He was near the wrong end of an explosion. That still does not explain why he came in labeled with a gunshot wound. Because people say gunshot when they see blood and a hole, Grace replied. It reads better in a chart than something went very wrong. The resident who had stepped closer lifted his eyes to her. You saw this kind of thing a lot, he asked. She could feel the room listening again. Grace let herself meet his gaze fully. I saw enough, she said. Noah shifted at the sound of her voice. His eyes had drifted half-closed, the edges of exhaustion creeping in now that his body was no longer trying to throw itself off the bed. He looked down toward his shoulder, then back up at her. Doorway, he murmured. 2 floors up. Charge went off lower than it was supposed to. Grace's jaw tightened. The image came back in sharp, unwelcome detail. A blown-out doorway, its frame sagging, dust like fog. The taste of chalk and iron. A pressure wave rolling up a stairwell. She pushed it aside enough to keep moving. Injury trajectory, she said more for Lang now. Tilt him slightly. I want to see how far the path extends. Lang gestured to the team. On 3, he said. 1, 2, 3. They rolled Noah just enough to open the view of his back and side without tearing anything else. He grunted, teeth clenched, but did not fight them. Grace saw the full channel of damage then. The angle did not line up with a shot from straight ahead. It curved downward as if the force had come from somewhere to his right and below, catching him while he was turned. Exactly the way you stood, if you were covering a stairwell and someone shoved you sideways out of the main line of fire. Her stomach clenched. I have seen this pattern, she heard herself say. Lang raised a brow. In your extensive 6 weeks of civilian nursing? In my years as a corpsman, she answered, finally letting the word out where all of them could hear it, and not just anywhere. The air in the bay shifted. The residents traded glances. Security stayed near the curtain, but had relaxed their stance, hands off the restraints now. The nurse holding the gauze froze halfway to the tray. Lang folded his arms. Where then? He asked. Since we are apparently swapping war stories in my trauma unit. Grace looked back at the wound, at the way the burns and specks and torn flesh formed a familiar constellation. There had been a building, thick white walls, cracks running like veins, a charge hidden in a pile of rubble that should have been inert. The first blast had taken the corner off the roof. The second had turned the stairwell into a shotgun. The tactical signature had been distinct. The kind of method that was not improvised on the spot, but practiced. Refined. She knew better than to say the region or the name of the town or the unit numbers out loud. Those things came attached to alarms she had no desire to trigger. Still, the label bloomed in her mind without permission. Night glass. She did not realize she had whispered it until Noah responded. His fingers flexed on the sheet, the lines bracketing his mouth deepened. Yeah, he said, voice hoarse. That one. The resident nearest the bed frowned. Night glass, he repeated. Is that some kind of op code? Lang shot him a warning look. That is none of your concern, he said. Then he eyed Grace again sharper. And not ours either, unless it affects whether this man keeps his arm and his life. It affects everything, Noah muttered. Grace breathed in through her nose slow. Shrapnel like this can migrate, she said, forcing her tone back to clinical. You miss even a few pieces and he bleeds later in places you are not looking. Or they heat up in imaging. You need to know what kind of metal you are dealing with, which we can determine with proper scans, Lang said pointedly. Not by staring at it and chanting poetry. The pattern tells you where to look, Grace replied. How deep to expect it. Where the overpressure might have done internal damage without obvious external signs. Lang held her gaze. Beneath the protective layer of arrogance, something in his expression shifted. Calculation, maybe. The recognition that information he did not have sat in front of him wearing blue scrubs and a red sticker. You are suggesting what? He asked. That we tailor our scans to match some classified playbook in your head. I am suggesting you do not treat this like a clean gunshot on a firing range, she said. He was in tight quarters when it hit. That means echo in his chest, potential lung involvement, maybe microfractures? You look for the echoes, not just the holes. The words came more easily now. She could almost feel sand under her knees again. Feel the thud of distant artillery under her palms on someone else's skin. Her body remembered how to talk these people through staying alive. The resident scribbled notes on the back of his glove with a marker eyes wide. Lang took a breath as if he were about to argue, then let it out in a short, irritated sigh. Fine, he said. We will run an extended series on the chest and shoulder, and we will note possible concussive trauma. Satisfied? Grace almost smiled. This is not about my satisfaction, she said. He will thank you for it when he can lift that arm again. Noah's mouth twitched. You assuming I am keeping the arm? He murmured. Grace looked at him, at the strain etched around his eyes, at the way his fingers hovered on the edge of reaching for her rail and stopping. I am planning for it, she said. You can handle the rest. That earned her a faint, tired huff that might have once been a laugh. Lang cleared his throat. Get him to imaging as soon as he is stable enough to move, he told the team. Prep or two just in case, and someone find out if he has any family on record. The staff dispersed with new purpose. The nurse with the gauze wrapped the wound temporarily. The resident with the marker went to input orders. The security officers, no longer needed at the bedside, slipped out between curtain folds. For a moment, the bay felt oddly spacious. Noah watched people leave, then eased his gaze back to Grace. Without all the bodies crowding the bed, the distance between them felt more deliberate. You read that like a map, he said quietly. Grace lifted one shoulder. You are bleeding on my floor, she replied. I am motivated. He kept looking at her, a question hovering just behind his eyes. You were not a doctor when I met you, he said. They called you something else. Corpsman, she said. Or doc, depending on how bad it was. He nodded, lids lowering for a beat. They told us no corpsman made it out, he murmured. Said the medic went down with the rest when the roof fell. Grace felt something twist tight in her chest. She did not touch it. She had learned what happened when you pulled on certain knots. They were misinformed, she said. Noah's gaze sharpened again, cutting through some of the fog. Yeah, he said. I'm starting to see that. The monitor steadied into a rough but workable rhythm. The air in the bay felt less charged now, less like the inside of a storm. From somewhere near the nurse's station, someone called her name. Holloway, we need you to sign off on the meds you pulled. She did not move right away. Go, Noah said. You are making the boss mad. He tilted his chin in the direction Lang had gone, a ghost of humor in the gesture. Grace let the corner of her mouth lift. He will live, she said. Noah looked at her wound assessment, at the temporary bandage, at the tubes and lines keeping him anchored. So will I, he said softly. Right, Doc? She met his eyes and held them, feeling the weight of too many nights in too many tents settle between them. That is the idea, she said. Then she stepped back from the bed, her hand trailing once along the metal rail before she let go and walked toward the curtain. The hallway outside Trauma 2 felt colder than the room she had just left. Voices spilled in from other bays, a kid crying behind a curtain, a man arguing about his wait time, the television in the waiting room talking to no one about the weather. All of it ran together into a wash of sound that did nothing to drown out the echo of her own words. Raven 3, Echo Fall. Grace walked to the meds cabinet on autopilot. The scanner chirped when she swiped her badge. The screen blinked to life. She entered her code, selected the drugs she had already pulled, and signed off on them. Her fingers hit the buttons cleanly without any of the shake she could feel crawling up her arms. Holloway. She looked up. Marta, the senior nurse, who had joked about ankle sprains earlier, stood a few feet away with a clipboard tucked to her chest. Her eyes were sharper now, less amused. You need a minute, Marta asked. You went quiet after they rolled him in. Grace shifted her weight. I am fine, she said. Marta glanced past her toward the curtain of Trauma 2. The hum of the monitor slipped through in thin mechanical beeps. He said your name, Marta said, like he knew you from somewhere. Grace kept her expression neutral. I was standing next to him, she replied. Not hard to catch a name in here. Marta studied her for another second, then snorted softly. Well, whatever you whispered worked, she said. I have not seen security back off a combative patient that fast in 10 years. She tapped the clipboard lightly with her pen. Lang is burning holes in your chart with his stare, but he has not filed a complaint. That has to mean something. Grace managed a small curve of her mouth. I will try not to ruin his stats, she said. Marta gave a short laugh. Good luck with that, she said, then moved off to answer a call light. Grace closed the cabinet. The soft click of the latch sounded louder than it should. She stood there a moment longer, hand still on the handle. Her reflection looked back at her from the metal surface, pale from the fluorescent lights, hair pulled tight, eyes a shade too bright. Doc Holloway. The words did not belong in this hallway. She pushed herself away and turned back toward Trauma 2. The curtain had been pulled, mostly closed again, leaving only a thin gap. She could see a sliver of Noah through it. The edge of the gurney, the slope of his knee under the sheet, the flex of his fingers when a nurse tightened a line. Lang was not at the foot of the bed anymore. Only one resident remained inside, checking numbers on the monitor and charting on a tablet. It was the younger one, the one who had written on his glove. Grace stepped in. The resident looked up startled, then relaxed when he saw her. Vitals are holding, he said quietly. Pressure is still low, but it is not free fall anymore. They are getting imaging ready. Grace nodded and moved to the far side of the bed, opposite the resident. The nurse adjusting the IV line shifted aside to make room for her. Noah's eyes were open again, heavy, but aware. The skin around them looked smudged, as if someone had pressed bruises there with their thumbs. How is the floor? He murmured. Still in one piece. She understood the translation. It was the kind of question you asked when you were used to rooms coming apart. For now, she said. You made an impression. He huffed a small dry sound. That seems to happen a lot, he said. The resident pretended to focus on the tablet, but his ears were clearly tilted in their direction. Noah stared at the ceiling for a long breath, then shifted his gaze back to her. They said you did not make it, he said. After night glass. The name sat between them like a dropped instrument. Sharp, bright, out of place. Grace felt the pull of it the way it tugged at images she kept locked down in the back of her mind. White stone walls lit orange by fire. A ladder against a crumbling edge. Voices shouting over each other on 3 different radios. A man with a ruined leg refusing morphine because he wanted his last words clear. She gripped the rail again, thumb, rubbing along the cool surface. They said a lot of things, she replied. Yeah, Noah said. Like that all medics were KIA when the roof went. That no one walked out of that building with a red cross on their sleeve. His eyes flicked down to her scrub top. No cross, no rank. Only the hospital logo and her name. You were not supposed to exist anymore, he said. Grace let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. That makes 2 of us, she said. The resident finally looked up from the chart. KIA, he repeated, cautious. Killed in action. Noah did not look at him. That is what they told us, he said. We put her name on a wall for 3 years. Grace's stomach clenched. She had imagined something like that. Her name carved somewhere, chalked somewhere, spoken over a toast she was not there to drink. It had seemed safer not to know for sure. Who is we? She asked, keeping her tone even. Noah blinked slow. Raven team, he said. What was left of it? Few of us kept meeting up after they scattered us. Kept a bottle, kept a list. He swallowed. Your name was near the top, he said. The resident's eyes bounced between them as if he had stumbled into a conversation in a language he almost understood. You really were a medic, he said to Grace. She did not answer him. She looked at Noah instead. Who else made it? She asked. The question came out before she could stop it. It surprised both of them. She saw it in the way his brow creased. You really want the roll call? He asked. Her throat tightened. Start with the roof, she said. Pain flickered across his face that had nothing to do with the wound in his shoulder. Roof team, he said slowly. Yumi, Carter, Mills, Reyes, and Russ. He stopped on the last name. Grace felt the air thicken. Carter, Mills, Reyes. Faces rose up behind her eyes. Carter's crooked grin, Mills' steady hands on a radio, Reyes humming under his breath when he thought no one could hear. Reyes, she repeated softly. He made it to the convoy, Noah said. Leg never healed right, but he is out. Owns a garage somewhere with terrible coffee. He paused. Carter did not, he said. The edges of the room blurred for a moment. Flash. The beam overhead cracking. Carter shoving her toward the stairwell with a force that sent her to her knees. Dust raining down like ash. A flash that did not sound like the others. Hot wind hitting her side as she twisted around and saw nothing where he had been. Her lungs forgot how to work for a heartbeat. And Russ? She asked, even though she already knew. Noah's jaw flexed. You know, he said. She did. Russ in the doorway. Russ with his hand on her vest, pushing her through the last intact wall. Russ turning back toward the hall with his weapon up as she dragged someone down the stairs. She heard his voice again so clearly, it might have been the present. That is an order, Holloway. Move. She had moved. The building had folded in on itself behind her in a roar. She blinked hard. The ER snapped back into focus. The smell of antiseptic replaced the stink of dust. The monitor beeped instead of distant rotor blades. The resident had gone very quiet. We are not talking about that here, she said. The line of Noah's mouth tightened. Where then? He asked. Because I have been carrying the version where you did not walk out. Turns out that was the wrong one. His voice stayed soft, but there was a weight in it now. Not accusation. Something closer to insistence. Grace looked around the bay, at the nurse pretending to organize syringes, at the resident pretending to read lab results, at the curtain that did nothing to keep sound from leaking. This is not the place, she said. Noah huffed another humorless sound. Feels familiar to me, he said. Bright lights, too many people, not enough doors. She could not argue with that. Dum. A voice from the hall cut through the tension. Imaging is ready for trauma 2. The resident jumped, then nodded quickly. Right, he said. We should move him. He looked at Grace as if asking permission he had no reason to need. She stepped back from the bed. Go ahead, she said. Just keep that arm as still as you can. Noah watched her as they unlocked the wheels and started to roll him out. The movement jostled his shoulder, and a line of pain creased his forehead, but he did not look away. You disappeared, he said quietly. She stood just inside the curtain, hands at her sides. So did you, she replied. His eyes held hers one last second. Then the gurney turned, and he was gone, pushed down the hall toward radiology, the sound of his monitor fading with each foot of linoleum. Grace stayed where she was staring at the space he had occupied until the fabric fell still. Holloway. The resident, the one with the marker on his glove, lingered at the edge of the bay. Up close, he looked younger than his white coat tried to make him. I am Jamie, he said. Dr. Park, I probably should have introduced myself an hour ago. She nodded once. Nice to meet you, Dr. Park, she said. He shifted his weight. You really served, he said, in that operation, night glass. Her shoulders stiffened. Is that going to change how you read my chart? She asked. He shook his head quickly. No, he said. I mean, maybe, in a good way. I did not know I was standing next to someone who could read a blast wound like that. He flushed, realizing how it sounded. I am not saying you did not look like you could, he added. Nobody told us. Nobody was supposed to, she said. He nodded slowly. Well, he said, I am glad somebody did. Tell us, before we shocked his heart into oblivion. She almost smiled at that. Go finish your notes, she said. He is going to need a competent surgical team. Jamie straightened. I will try to fake being competent, he said. You can correct me when I am not. Then he left, hurrying down the hall, tablet hugged to his chest. Grace stepped out of the bay. Instead of heading back to the desk, she ducked into the small supply closet at the end of the corridor. The door clicked shut behind her. The smell in here was plastic and paper and the faint rubber scent of gloves. It was quiet. No monitors. No voices. She leaned her back against the cool metal shelves and closed her eyes. For a moment, she let the other room come back, the one with the cracked roof and the broken staircase, the one where Carter did not reach the convoy and Russ turned into a sound instead of a person. Raven 3, Echo Fall. The code sat on her tongue like something alive. She opened her eyes again and looked at her hands. They were steady now. She flexed her fingers once, then pushed herself off the shelf and reached for a new box of gauze. There were still patients waiting, still charts that did not know anything about night glass. She pulled the box down, tucked it under her arm, and stepped back into the light of the corridor. By the time Grace stepped back onto the main floor, the tempo of the ER had shifted again. The early rush had thinned. A few discharged patients shuffled out clutching plastic bags with prescriptions and instructions. A janitor worked quietly at a dried smear of mud by the entrance. The television in the waiting room had moved on from weather to a talking head segment that no one watched. At the nurse's station, Marta was arguing with a pharmacist on the phone about a dosage error. A stack of charts fanned out across the counter. Someone had abandoned a cold cup of coffee near the printer. The surface shimmered with a thin layer of oil. Grace dropped the box of gauze in the supply bin and checked the board. Trauma 2 showed a new line. Reddick Noah, imaging. Next to it, in neat block letters, someone had written or 2 on standby. Her stomach tightened. She pulled up his chart on the nearest computer, scanning the latest entries. Blood work logged. Orders for CT chest and shoulder. Notes from Lang and Park. Shani. A shadow fell across the monitor. Excuse me? The voice was male smooth and carried something that did not quite fit the rest of the noise in the ER. It had a practiced weight to it, the kind used in briefings and interviews. Grace turned. The man standing at the corner of the station did not look like a patient or a family member. His suit was too well cut, his posture too straight. He wore a dark gray jacket, no-tie white shirt open at the collar. His shoes were polished even with rain on the pavement outside. He held an ID badge clipped to his belt. The plastic caught the light when he shifted his hip, but the text was turned away from her. Can I help you? Marta asked, still holding the phone to her ear. I am looking for the attending on Captain Noah Reddick, the man said, and for a nurse named Holloway. Grace felt the back of her neck prickle. Marta covered the receiver with her hand and jerked her chin toward Grace. Holloway is right there, she said. Lang is in consult. The man's eyes moved to Grace and settled there. They were a cool hazel, careful in the way they relaxed, as if every expression passed through a filter before it reached the surface. Miss Holloway, he said. Good. Saves me a step. He stepped closer into the circle of fluorescent light above the station and flipped his badge around with 2 fingers. Department of Defense, Federal Liaison, under that his name, Cole Everett. Grace did not flinch, but she did feel something inside her brace for impact. Is there a problem? She asked. Cole shook his head once. Problem is a strong word, he said. Let us call it an urgent point of interest. Marta listened to that then, to the tinny voice on the other end of the phone, muttered something about calling back and hung up. I did not know DOD sent suits for regular trauma cases, she said. We do not, Cole replied. Captain Reddick is not a regular trauma case. His attention stayed on Grace as he spoke. You were in the room with him when he came in, he said. You calmed him when security could not. Grace kept her arms loose at her sides. I was doing my job, she said. Plenty of people in scrubs in this building, Cole said. Only one of them said 6 very specific syllables. Marta looked between them. I can go check on the front desk, she announced, backing away. Make sure nobody stole the magazines. She left not so quickly that it looked like fleeing, but fast enough to leave the 2 of them in a small bubble of space. Cole watched her go, then refocused on Grace. Walk with me, he said. It came out as a suggestion, but there was an undertone beneath it that made it sound like an instruction, the kind built into bone. Grace glanced once at the board, then at the hallway that led toward imaging. She weighed her options and found they all ended in the same place. Fine, she said. He started down the corridor at an easy pace, not strolling, not rushing, the kind of walk that assumed people would move out of his way, and they did even if they did not realize why. Grace fell in step beside him. Up close, she noted the small details, the faint wear at the edges of his collar, the line of a watch under his cuff, the way his eyes flicked automatically to doorways and intersections as they passed. He was not just a suit. You know his rank, she said. You know mine. Cole glanced at her. Hospital corpsman 2nd class if the records I saw are not lying, he said. HM2, or doc, apparently. The word brushed over her skin like a cold hand. Those records were sealed, she said. They were, he agreed. That seal loosened the minute you used an active call sign from a black file in a civilian emergency room. They reached a quieter stretch of hallway near an unused consult room. Cole stopped by the wall and turned to face her fully. You were not supposed to use it, he said. Raven 3, Echo Fall. The code sounded different in his mouth. Flatter, stripped of memory. I was not supposed to need it, she replied. Something flickered across his expression at that. Not sympathy, recognition. What did you see when you walked into that bay? He asked. Because from where I read it all, anyone expected to see was a dangerous veteran and a lot of paperwork. Grace pictured Noah again, eyes glassed over, muscles coiled, hands snapping toward the oxygen mask. I saw a man who did not know which room he was in, she said. And I saw where the blast hit his shoulder. Cole nodded slowly. Not many people can read both at once, he said. He reached inside his jacket. Grace tensed just a fraction. It was reflex, not logic. His hands were empty when they came back out, holding a plain, thick envelope. No markings on the front, no return address, only a name typed in clean black letters. HM2 Holloway, Grace Hospital, Corseman, 2nd class. The air around her seemed to go a shade thinner. She looked at the envelope, then at him. This is a hospital, she said. You could have sent an email. Some things do better on paper, he said. There are still a few doors that only open with an actual signature. He held it out. She did not take it right away. Why now? She asked. You had my records the whole time. We had a file on someone who did not want to be found, Cole said. A medic flagged as presumed KIA in an operation that went sideways in every direction. Command made a call to lock it. You helped that call stick by disappearing. His gaze held hers. Tonight, Captain Reddick comes in bleeding from a pattern that matches a cached tactical report from the same region, he continued. Then he wakes up trying to rip the room apart and stops cold when you call him by a name that was never supposed to leave that valley. He tilted the envelope slightly. That makes your file relevant and, he said. Grace stared at her name on the paper. I am not in the Navy anymore, she said. I am aware, Cole said. The envelope does not change that. It updates the context. Something about the way he said context made her teeth clench. She reached out and took the envelope. The paper was heavier than it looked, cool against her fingers. Cole moved his hand back to his side. You should read it, he said. She slid a thumb under the sealed flap. The glue gave with a muted tear. Inside there was no multi-page memo or printed briefing, just a single sheet folded twice. She unfolded it carefully. 3 lines. The first held a heading. Operation Nightglass Status Review. Her eyes dropped to the list below. 1. Reddick Noah, A. Status, alive. 2. Holloway, Grace, M. Status, reactivated. The rest of the page was blank. No explanation, no instructions, no signature. Her pulse thudded against her ribs. Reactivated, she said. The word tasted dry, familiar, and foreign at once. In case the font is unclear, Cole said. Grace looked up. I did not agree to that, she said. Cole's expression did not change. You agreed to keep breathing, he said. That put you back on the board the second Nightglass shifted from theoretical history to active concern. You buried that file, she said. We sealed it, he corrected. Different choice of verb. Her fingers tightened on the paper. What does reactivated mean? She asked. On paper, he said, it means your clearance status is under internal review and that your name just moved from the far right column of a very old list into one we actually look at. And off paper, she pressed. He considered her for a moment. Off paper, he said quietly. It means the people who walked away from that building are still anchors when the ground around it starts to move again. We pay attention to our anchors. He was too calm, too measured. She recognized the technique. Keep the voice low and steady, drip information in controlled doses, never show urgency unless you want it to spread. She hated that it was effective. I left, she said. I took my discharge and I left. I did not ask to be anyone's anchor. Cole inclined his head. Your preference is noted, he said. So is the fact that when the situation pushed, you did not hesitate to reach for the tools you threw away. His heart was racing, she snapped. His brain was back there. It was a code he would respond to, that is all. It was a key, Cole said. You turned it, the door opened, and now we are here. Behind him down the hallway, a transport team pushed an empty gurney toward the main hub. A volunteer walked past, carrying a stack of folded blankets. The ordinary life of the hospital moved on a few feet away, untouched. Grace looked back at the sheet in her hands. Her name, the old operation, the new status, reactivated. She folded the paper once, twice along the original creases. Each line felt like a decision she had not been consulted on. Why put his name first? She asked. Cole's mouth twitched at the corner, almost a smile, but not quite. He is the one in the bed, he said. You are the one standing upright, different kind of urgency. He thinks I died, she said. And until tonight, as far as his side of the paperwork knew he was right, Cole replied. That is another context that just shifted. Grace slid the page back into the envelope and held it against her chest. Does he know, she asked, about this? About the status change, Cole said. Not yet. About you being here, she said. I spoke with him before he went to imaging, Cole said. Briefly. He is aware that the department is paying attention. Of course he had. Did you ask him permission to drag me into this? She asked. No, Cole said. I did not need his permission to follow a code phrase to its source. He watched her fingers dig into the envelope. I did ask him one question, Cole added. I asked if the person who used that phrase in the trauma bay tonight was the same one who kept them alive on another very ugly night. He paused. He said yes, Cole finished, without hesitation. Grace let out a slow breath. The hallway seemed to tilt for a moment just slightly as if the building had shifted on its foundation. You came here to tell me my name moved on a list, she said. Is that all? For now, Cole said. This is an emergency department and you are on shift. I am not here to pull you into a van. The offhand way he said it made her almost laugh, almost. His gaze flicked past her shoulder back toward the trauma bays. I needed you to see that paper, he said. To understand that people above my pay grade are aware you exist and are adjusting their mental maps accordingly. Maps, she repeated. You know the kind, he said, with circles and lines and names written in margins. You have drawn some yourself. That took her back for a second. Tonight's bent over crude sketches in dirt and on walls marking choke points and blast radii and safe routes. She pushed the memory away. I work here, she said. I draw blood and hang fluids and tell people where the bathrooms are. You also talk a collapsing soldier out of a flashback with 6 words and diagnose blast pattern injuries before the scans even run, Cole said. You are more than one line item. He stepped back a pace, leaving her with a little more air. We will talk again, he said. Preferably when your patient is not about to visit an operating room. He turned, then paused as if remembering something. Oh, he said. And Ms. Holloway. She looked up. Do not throw that envelope away, he said. Reactivated is not the sort of status that disappears because you pretend not to see it. Then he walked off calm and unhurried blending, back into the flow of the hospital corridor until he was just another dark jacket among scrubs and white coats. Grace stood alone for a moment after Cole disappeared into the traffic of the corridor. The envelope felt solid under her fingers, the corners digging into her palm. She slipped it inside her scrub pocket, flattening the fabric over it until the shape disappeared. The hospital noise washed back in. A call light chimed somewhere. Wheels squeaked. A distant phone rang, stopped, rang again. Then the overhead speaker crackled. Code Blue CT Suite, Code Blue CT Suite. Every muscle in her body tightened. She started moving before she registered the name that followed. Patient Reddick Noah. Her heart kicked hard against the envelope in her pocket. She did not run, not exactly. Her steps were fast enough that the air tugged at her scrub top, slow enough to weave through the people who reacted to the page with their own elastic speed. A respiratory tech jogged ahead of her, dragging a tackle box of equipment. 2 residents cut across from the opposite hall. The CT suite glowed at the end of the corridor, bright and sterile. The sliding door was already open. The sound hit her first. The monitor sharp and frantic. Voices layered on top of each other, no rhythm. The mechanical whir of the scanner bed frozen halfway out. She stepped inside. Noah lay on the CT table sheet, twisted under him. The thin plastic of the nasal cannula had been replaced with a mask, again strapped tight over his nose and mouth. His chest heaved, fighting against it. His skin had shifted from gray to a patchy, alarming blue. The right side of his chest rose differently than the left, slower, as if something were sitting on it. Lang stood at the head of the bed, already in fresh gloves, his expression clipped and controlled. Pressure is crashing, one of the CT techs said. He started desatting halfway through the scan. We tried to pull him out, but he just dropped. Heart rate is 160 and irregular, a resident called out, eyes locked on the monitor. He is going into an arrhythmia. Get the crash cart in here, Lang snapped. Charge to 200. We are not losing him in a hallway scanner. A nurse shoved the red cart closer. The defibrillator on top was already waking up a thin, rising whine as it charged. Grace edged around a tech and came to the side of the table. Noah's eyes rolled under his lids, half open, half looking at nothing. His breaths were short and shallow, pulled through the mask in ragged gasps. Move back, Holloway, Lang barked. You do not have clearance for this one. She did not move. She looked at Noah's neck. The veins there stood out thick and roped, pulsing against his skin. She looked at his chest. The left side rose fell. The right side barely moved, a tight, strained shift under the bruised skin. Her ears filtered the noise, picked out the sounds that mattered. The monitor did not sound like a heart that had decided to quit. It sounded like a heart that was pushing against something it could not get around. She pressed 2 fingers lightly against his collarbone, just to feel the way the muscles tugged with each breath. Too much effort for too little air. The defibrillator beeped ready. 200 joules, the nurse at the cart reported. Charged. Lang grabbed the paddles. Clear, he said. You do that, Grace said, and you will fry a heart that is trying to work. Her words cut into the room, blunt and sharp at the same time. Lang paused with the paddles still in his hands. This is not the moment for poetry, he snapped. He is in a malignant rhythm. He is in trouble because he cannot breathe, Grace said. Not because his heart forgot how. She pointed with her chin, keeping her hands out of the way. Look at his neck, she said. Look at his right chest. Listen if you have the nerve. The resident with the tablet hesitated, then grabbed a stethoscope and pressed it gently against the left side of Noah's chest, then the right. Left breath sounds, rough but there. Right, a hollow quiet like pressing an ear to a door and hearing nothing behind it when there should be a room. Decreased breath sounds on the right, the resident said, voice unsteady. Almost none. Neck veins are distended. Another added eyes flicking between Noah's throat and the blood pressure reading. BP is 60/30. Heart rate is still high. Grace could almost feel the shape of the air trapped inside Noah's chest. Pushing his lung down, shoving his mediastinum across, squeezing his heart where it sat trying to do its job in a shrinking space. Tension physiology, she said. Right-sided, his heart is not the primary problem, it is collateral damage. Lang tightened his grip on the paddles. And what would you suggest, he said, we do while his rhythm disintegrates? Talk it down. Relieve the pressure, she said. Or you can shock him all night, and it will not fix the fact that his lung is choking his heart. The CT techs had gone silent. They clung to the edges of the room, looking from Lang to Grace with wide eyes. The crash cart hummed softly under the defibrillator, a counterpoint to the growing alarm on the monitor. This is not a field hospital, Lang said. We do not stab people in scanners and hope for the best. We follow protocol. Grace stepped closer to the table so she could see the landmarks clearly. Second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line on the right, the place her hands had gone without needing to think years ago. We follow physiology, she said. You decompress that chest, you give his heart room, his rhythm has a chance. You shock him now, you cook what is left while the house is still on fire. Lang clenched his jaw. Nurse, he said to the woman at the cart, hand me the paddles. The nurse shifted, caught between 2 currents. Someone else moved first. Jamie Park appeared at Grace's shoulder. Breath a little short from the run. I heard the page, he said quickly. What is happening? Right-sided tension, Grace said. Secondary to blast. He is drowning, not dying. Jamie looked at the monitor, then at Noah's chest, then at the paddles. Are we sure? He asked. Look at him, she replied. He did. Something settled in his face, a decision sliding into place. He turned to the crash cart and yanked open a drawer, fingers moving through packs, until he found what he wanted. An 18-gauge needle, long, in its sterile wrapper. He ripped the package open and slapped the syringe into Grace's waiting hand. Here, he said. Lang stared at him. What do you think you are doing? Lang demanded. Not killing him by accident, Jamie said, voice tighter than usual. The air in the room felt thinner. Grace did not wait for permission that was not coming. She snapped the cap off the needle and handed it to the nurse to hold while she swabbed quickly at the target spot with an alcohol pad. Air kissed the wet skin. Noah's breath rasped against the mask. She pressed her fingers along his ribs, counting silently. Second space, mid-clavicular, a space she could find in the dark if she had to. On 3, she said to Noah, even though she was not sure how much of her voice reached through. 1, she drew back the syringe. 2, she felt the weight of every eye in the room on her hand. 3, she drove the needle in. There was resistance at first, a rubbery give as it passed through skin and tissue. Then with a sudden softness, it slipped into the pleural space. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then there was a hiss. It was not loud, but it carried a thin rush of air escaping through metal, the trapped pressure bleeding out. The monitor stuttered, then steadied by a fraction. The line of Noah's neck veins eased, flattening slightly. His next breath dragged in deeper, less strangled. The number on his oxygen saturation climbed by 2, then 3 points. Jamie let out the breath he had been holding. Vitals are creeping back, he said. Heart rate still high, but the rhythm is less chaotic. The nurse at the cart slowly lowered the paddles back into their cradle. The defibrillator's whine held for a second, then began to drop as the charge bled off. Lang watched the numbers on the monitor as if they might lie to him. Noah's eyes fluttered, then opened a little wider. The glassy edge had shifted. There was more present in them now, less wild. He turned his head just enough to see Grace at his side. Tuesday, he rasped, voice frayed. Grace leaned closer, still holding the needle steady. What? She asked. He swallowed. We used to call that Tuesday, he said. Back then. She felt a reluctant laugh catch in her chest. Here we call it saving your life, she said. Lang cleared his throat, the sound awkward in the settled air. What procedure did you just perform for the record? He asked, as if the phrasing could make it less obvious that he had just watched her do it. Needle decompression, she said. Hemodynamic salvage, if you want the fancy term. You can chart it however makes the lawyers breathe easier. The CT tech nearest the machine let out a quiet, shaky chuckle that broke the last of the frozen tension. Lang looked from Noah to the gauge on the syringe, then to the monitor. We still need to get him to the OR, he said, tone a notch softer. But he is not coding on a table in my scanner. That is something. Grace handed the syringe off to the nurse to secure and stepped back half a pace, giving the team room to move. Jamie checked the monitor again. Pressure is up to 80/48, he reported. Oxygen is climbing. He is not pretty, but he is holding. All right, Lang said. Move him, carefully this time. No more mask over his mouth unless absolutely necessary. He met Grace's eyes for the briefest second. There was no apology there, not yet. Only a reluctant acknowledgement. Good call, he said. The words were clipped, but they were there. Grace inclined her head. It is his lung you should thank, she said. It wanted some personal space. They rolled the CT table out enough to transfer Noah back to a gurney. The motion was smoother now. Every hand on him seemed more cautious, more aware of how close they had just come to a different outcome. As they lifted, Noah's fingers brushed against Grace's wrist. It was not a grip, not a desperate clutch. Just contact. She glanced down. His eyes had drifted half-closed. Again exhausted, but there was a line of connection still there, a recognition that had survived oxygen masks and needles. Stay, he breathed the word barely taking shape. I am not going far, she said. They settled him on the gurney and began to wheel him out. Grace walked alongside for a few steps, then peeled off near the doorway as the surgical team converged to take over. The swinging doors to the OR opened, swallowed the gurney, and closed again, muffling the sound of the monitor behind solid glass. She found herself alone again, in the CT suite, the machine still, the room smelling faintly of ozone and antiseptic. Jamie stayed behind too, hands resting on the crash cart handle. He looked at her, eyes wide and a little stunned. You did that like you have done it 100 times, he said. She exhaled slowly. I have, she answered. He let that settle. I almost shocked him, Jamie said quietly. I followed Lang's lead and almost cooked a heart that was not the main problem. I did not even think to look at his chest first. You thought of it when you listened, she said. Next time you will think of it sooner. Jamie smiled weakly. Next time, he said, I am calling you first. You better not wait that long, she replied. They rolled the crash cart back into position by the wall. The CT techs began to reset the room, wiping the table, coiling cables, unsilencing alarms. Grace touched her scrub pocket, feeling the outline of the envelope again. Reactivated. The word no longer felt like something happening on a separate plane. It had followed her into the CT suite, into her hand, into the precise angle of a needle that had released air and given a heart room. She turned toward the hallway. There would be updates soon, surgical notes, post-op vitals, new rhythms to listen to. For now, she walked back into the bright, constant motion of St. Gabriel with the weight of an old life sitting against her ribs and the echo of a hissed breath still in her ears. The OR doors had barely swung shut before the ER started stitching itself back together. Grace took a few steps away from the CT suite and was immediately pulled into 3 different directions. A child with a split chin, an elderly woman who had fallen in the shower, a man insisting his chest pain was probably something he ate. The small, ordinary emergencies did their work. They filled her hands. They gave her tasks with clear beginnings and ends. Still, every time she passed the board, her eyes slid to the same line. Reddick Noah, or 2. The status next to it flickered from pre-op to in procedure. A long stretch of time settled under that label. Then eventually it changed again. Post-op, SICU. The shift clock rolled on. The hands on the big, round wall clock near the station crept from just past 9 into the heavy weight of after midnight. The storm outside drifted away from the windows. The rain let up. The darkness stayed. At one point, Marta pressed a paper cup of coffee into Grace's hand without a word. It had cooled by the time Grace remembered to drink it. The bitter taste still cut through the fog in her head when she did. Between patients, she found herself looking down the hall toward the bank of elevators that led to the intensive care unit. It felt like looking at a different country. Finally, when the board showed no immediate fires waiting for her name and the hallway noise settled into a manageable hum, she heard what she had been half listening for. Holloway. She turned. Jamie stood there, surgical cap in his hand hair, flattened in odd lines where the elastic had pressed. His scrubs bore a couple of faint, dried smears that had once been blood. His eyes were tired, but there was a visible light under the fatigue. He is out, Jamie said. Surgery went as well as it could. They stabilized the artery, pulled out what they could of the fragments. The arm is still attached. Some of the tightness in her chest loosened. "How is his heart?" she asked. "Holding a grudge," Jamie replied. "But better. Rhythm is ugly, not catastrophic. They are watching him upstairs." She nodded once. "Good," she said. Jamie shifted his cap from one hand to the other. "You can go see him, you know," he said. "You are listed in the notes as the reason he made it to the OR without coding. I do not think anyone will kick you out if you stand in a doorway for 5 minutes." Grace considered the elevators again. "I am on shift," she said. "So am I," Jamie said. "We just changed our view. There are enough bodies on the floor to cover you for a few minutes. Marta said to tell you that if you do not go, she will find an excuse to send you up anyway." The idea of Marta conspiring with the hospital's newest trauma surgeon made the corner of Grace's mouth lift. "She forgets who trained whom," she said. Jamie smiled. "I think she remembers," he said. "She just also remembers what happens when people try to muscle through things alone." He let that sit for a second. "Go," he added, "before Lang comes out of his post-op glow and finds more charts for you to sign." She gave in. The elevator ride up was short and smooth. The numbers above the doors blinked from 1 to 2 to 3. On the 3rd floor, the lights felt different. Softer, less harsh, the air was cooler, the sounds were more measured. The surgical ICU stretched out in a long, quiet line. Large windows at one end showed the city scattered with lights. The nursing station here was smaller, with fewer people, the conversations low and clipped. Grace checked the room list and found his number. PsyQ 7. She walked there slowly, each step pressing the dull rubber of the floor against the soles of her shoes. The door to 7 was half open. A monitor glow spilled out into the hall, painting a faint green line on the opposite wall. She knocked once on the frame with her knuckles, a soft, polite sound. The nurse inside looked up from the chart. "You are Holloway," the nurse said. She wore dark blue scrubs hair, tied back, eyes alert, but not unkind. Her badge read, Lucy RN. Grace blinked. "Word moves fast," she said. "Lang was very clear," Lucy replied. "If a quiet one named Grace shows up, let her in." There was the faintest trace of amusement in her tone. 5 minutes, Lucy added. "He is sedated, but his body is still deciding how mad it is at us." Grace stepped into the room. The lighting here stayed low, focused mostly on the bed. Machines formed a loose ring around it, screens flickering with numbers and lines. The smell was antiseptic and plastic, and the faint iron hint that never quite left after major surgery. Noah looked smaller under the blankets. The bulk that had seemed so imposing in the ER was partially hidden now under layers of white and tubing. His shoulder was wrapped in a thick dressing-clean bandage where the bloody gauze had been. A clear line of sutures peeked out along his upper chest where they had gone in. A ventilator did not breathe for him, but the nasal cannula remained delivering oxygen. The rise and fall of his chest was slower, more even. The monitor showed a rhythm that still had some irregular bumps, but no wild spikes. His face, without the strain of pain contorting it, had softer lines. The small scar at his hairline stood out more starkly. Grace stepped closer, stopping at the side of the bed, where she could see his face and the numbers at the same time. Lucy moved to the other side, checking the drip rates on his IV pump. "He has been muttering," Lucy said conversationally, "before he drifted off. Names mostly, a few words I did not understand." Grace watched the slow movement of his eyelids. They flickered once, not fully opening a sign that he was hovering somewhere between deep sedation and the edges of awareness. "Did he seem agitated?" Grace asked. "A little," Lucy said. "But when I told him you were okay, he settled." Grace looked at her. "You told him," she said. Lucy shrugged. "I put 2 and 2 together," she said. "Trauma nurses gossip." Also, one of the residents was very bad at whispering. Grace let out a soft breath that might almost have been a laugh. Lucy adjusted a line, then stepped back. "I will give you a minute," she said. "If he starts trying to crawl out of bed, hit the red button. If he stops breathing, hit the red button twice." Then she slipped out the door, whispering closed behind her. The room felt larger without another person in it, even with the machines. Grace moved closer to the bed and wrapped her fingers around the foot of the rail. The metal felt the same as every other rail in the building. Yet her hand tightened on it, as if it might be a different one. She watched Noah breathe for several seconds, counting each rise. Inhale, she thought. Exhale. Her own breath fell into the same rhythm before she realized it. His eyelids fluttered again. This time one of them lifted halfway. A sliver of hazel appeared beneath it, blurred and unfocused. "You are supposed to be asleep," she said quietly. He made a small sound, something between a sigh and a groan. "Not good at that," he murmured. The words were slow-shaped around sedation, but they were words. "You just got your shoulder opened and your chest poked," she said. "You could try for a little cooperation." He managed to focus a bit more, his gaze finding the shape of her face above him. "You stayed when he said." The simple, hoarse statement carried more than the 3 syllables should have. "I work here," she replied. "You know what I mean," he said. She did. "I am on borrowed time," she said. 5 minutes, according to Lucy. You should use them for something useful. He let his gaze travel around the room, taking in the machines, the low light, the city's dim glow beyond the glass. Then he brought it back to her. They told us night glass was over, he said. That again. She felt the familiar clench in her chest, but it was less violent this time, as if the word had worn a small groove. It is, she said. For most people. He shifted his fingers on the sheet as if testing the reality of the fabric. That suits guy, he said. He was here before they rolled me in. Told me command was dusting off some files. Cole, she said. That his name? Noah asked. He looked like he wanted 10 different things and did not want to admit any of them out loud. Grace huffed softly. That sounds about right, she said. He asked me about you, Noah added. Asked if the person who whispered into my head tonight was the same one who dragged us across that courtyard when the world was falling apart. He swallowed, throat moving with effort. I told him yes, he said, in case you were wondering. She was. He showed me a paper, Wessa, she said. Your name on it. Mine. Under a heading I did not expect to see again. You did not, Noah said. Or you did not want to. Both, she said. He watched her, his gaze clearer now, though still heavy with the leftover weight of anesthesia. You left, he said. I do not blame you. You stayed, since she said. I do not blame you either. The silence between them was not empty. It was full thick with things not yet said. I woke up in Germany with a tube in my throat, Noah said after a moment. They told me the roof went. They told me Carter and Russ did not make it. He spoke their names quietly, careful in the way he laid them down in the space between them. They told me the medic went with them, he continued. No survivors on that floor besides me. That is the version I have had in my head every time I think about that night. Grace looked at the bandage on his shoulder. Clean edges, neat work, the opposite of the way Carter and Russ had vanished. Your version worked for what you needed, she said. He shook his head slightly against the pillow. My version gave me a ghost to salute, he said. Not a person. Her grip on the rail tightened. You did that, she asked. Salute. Every year, he said. We would get together, a few of us, drink something too strong, raise glasses, say names. Yours was one of them. The image settled over her. A dim bar. Men with the same hollowed-out look, their eyes softened at the edges with time, but not entirely healed. Her name in their mouths, like a ritual. I do not know what to do with that, she admitted. You keep breathing, he said. That is step one. That is very original advice, she said. If you wanted creativity, you should not have let me get concussed twice in one night, he replied. She almost smiled. His hand lying near the edge of the blanket twitched. Not quite reaching, but close. She lifted her own and rested it lightly on the rail above it. The gesture left the space between them intact, but bridged it at the same time. I saw Carter, she said quietly. When the first blast hit, he pushed me. I do not remember hitting the floor. I remember the sound when the beam came down. Noah's eyes darkened. He did not interrupt. Russ ordered me out, she continued, and he got between me and the hallway. I grabbed Mills. You were already half-conscious trying to get up. There were too many people and not enough door. Her throat tightened, but the words kept coming, pulled along by a tide that had waited years for an outlet. I have replayed that stairwell so many times, I can feel each step under my feet, she said. How many breaths I took between the top and the bottom. How many seconds were between the last time I heard Russ's voice and the moment the building folded. Her voice dropped. If I had been faster, stronger, better, maybe. Stop, Noah said. It was not sharp, it was firm. You know that speech, he added. You have aimed it at yourself more times than you can count, the part where you rewrite physics to pretend you could hold up a building. She looked at him. Do you not? She asked. Of course I do, he said, but I usually save it for 3 a.m. when there is no one around to listen. He shifted his hand again this time, letting his fingers brush the metal near her knuckles. It was not a full touch, but it was aligned. Cole said they reviewed the after action, Noah said. Said the last thing Russ did was shove you toward the exit and hold his ground. He swallowed. That sounds like him, he said. He made you move so you could drag the rest of us out. That is not you failing. That is him doing the math. Grace let the words land. They hit something that had been locked and twisted inside her, something that resisted, and then gave way just a fraction. Does it make it easier? She asked. No, he said. It makes it different. They let the quiet stretch after that. The monitor beeped in steady intervals. A pump clicked. Somewhere outside in the city, a siren wailed and then faded. Lucy will be back in a minute to kick me out, Grace said eventually. So, Noah said, you better use your remaining time. For what? She asked. He looked at her hand on the rail. For not disappearing, he said. She hesitated, then slid her fingers down, closing them lightly around his wrist over the IV tape and the faint pattern of pulse beneath. The contact was warm, solid, very human. I am here, she said. You said that before, he replied. I mean it more now, she said. He let his eyes close fully, at last the muscles in his face smoothing. Doc Holloway. He murmured the name softer, no longer a shock, more like a confirmation. Grace, she corrected gently. He did not answer. His breathing slipped into something deeper. The lines on the monitor stayed steady. The door opened with a soft click. Lucy poked her head in. Time, she said quietly. Grace nodded and carefully let go of Noah's wrist. Her hand felt oddly light afterward, as if she had been holding more than bone and skin. She stepped back from the bed. How is he? Lucy asked. Stubborn, Grace said. Lucy smiled. That is usually a good sign up here, she said. Grace glanced at him one last time, at the way the bandages rose and fell, with each breath, then stepped out into the hallway. On the way back to the elevators, she passed a window that looked out over Houston. The streets below glistened from the earlier rain. The storm had moved on, leaving the air clearer, the sky still dark, but less heavy. Her reflection hovered in the glass, overlaying the scattered lights. Scrubs badged tired eyes. For a second, she thought she could almost see another version of herself standing behind the first. Helmet, vest, dust on her cheeks. They did not cancel each other out. She turned away and pressed the elevator button. There was still a shift to finish. There were still patients who knew nothing about night glass, who only knew the weight of their own emergencies. As the doors slid open, she slipped back inside the moving box of light, heading down toward the noise, and the board, and the work that had always been her way of staying in motion. The elevator let her out back into the familiar chaos of the ER. The sounds felt louder after the hush of the ICU. Someone argued about insurance at the registration desk. A toddler howled somewhere behind pediatrics. A paramedic laughed too hard at a joke, the sound edged with leftover adrenaline. Grace slid behind the nurse's station and checked the board. New names had appeared. Cuts, sprains, a possible appendicitis, the ordinary steady river of small disasters. She folded herself back into it. For a while, there was only work. Blood pressures to take meds to pass a chart that refused to print properly. Her hands moved on their own drawing, on habits built over months here and years elsewhere. At some point, as she was double-checking a dosage at the computer, she felt it again. That subtle prickle at the back of her neck. The sense of someone watching who knew more than the average visitor. She finished entering the order before she looked up. Cole Everett leaned against the far corner of the station, a chart in his hand. He had traded his suit jacket for a dark cardigan, but the badge at his belt had not changed. The effect was strange, less formal, not softer. You really do work, do you not? He said. Some people pretend not to notice, she replied. I was briefed on the difference between civilian nursing and combat medicine, he said. No one mentioned paperwork was the common thread. She closed the chart. Are you here for him? She asked, or for me? Both, he said, not at the same time. Marta walked up, glanced between them, and made a quick adjustment to the whiteboard that did not seem to need adjusting. I'm going to check on bed 5, she said a shade too casually. Take your time, Holloway. Then she left the swish of her sneakers fading down the hall. Cole raised his eyebrows a fraction. You have friends, he observed. I have coworkers, she said. Some would argue there is overlap, he replied. He looked around at the station. Do you have anywhere that passes for private in this place? He asked. Or at least less public? Break room, she said, if no one is crying in there. They walked together down a short side hallway. The break room was small with 2 tables, a fridge that hummed constantly, and a microwave with a door that stuck. A faded poster about that hand hygiene peeled slightly at one corner. It was empty. Grace flicked on the light. It buzzed for a second before settling. Cole set a thin folder on the table and took the chair opposite hers. He placed the folder lengthwise, as if aligning it with invisible lines on the surface. I promised you a conversation, he said. You promised me more context, she replied. Same thing, he said. He tapped the folder once with 2 fingers. This is the after-action summary for Operation Nightglass, he said. The one you never read. Grace pulled out a chair and sat. Her knees brushed the underside of the table. They told me everything I needed to know when I signed my discharge, she said. Did they? He asked. They told me I was found with blast injuries and multiple concussions, she said. They told me the building collapsed. They told me I was lucky to be alive. Lucky is a generous word, Cole said. They told me the team took heavy losses, she added, which I already knew. He opened the folder. Inside was not much. A few pages clipped together, some lines were blacked out. Others remained neat print that turned chaos into bullet points and short sentences. He slid the top page between them. You know what it felt like, he said. This is what it looked like on the other side. She looked down at the paper. Her name was there in the list of personnel. So were the others. Reddick, Carter, Mills, Reyes, Russ. Her eyes skipped ahead. Contact initiated at target structure. First detonation. Structural compromise, upper levels. Evacuation ordered. Second detonation. Stairwell collapse. She felt her pulse pick up in her throat. Carter, she said. Cole took that as a cue and turned a page. There it was, Carter RKIA, caused structural impact during initial blast upper corridor. Body unrecovered due to instability of sight. Her vision narrowed for a moment. The words blurred, then sharpened. She swallowed. Russ, she asked. Cole flipped further. He tapped a paragraph halfway down. Corpsman Holloway ordered to withdraw injured personnel from upper level, he read. Sergeant Russell remained in position to cover retreat. Held corridor against advancing hostiles until third detonation. He paused. Quotes from surviving witnesses, he said. That part was unusual. They do not always include them. He turned the page so she could see it better. A section near the bottom held lines in a different font, like someone had pasted pieces of other reports into this one. He read the first aloud. Last seen, Sergeant Russell physically pushed HM2 Holloway toward exit, Mason, Cole said. Verbal order recorded on comms. That is an order. Move. The words echoed her own memory. Same cadence, same emphasis. Cole looked up. You told me you heard him say something like that, he said. She nodded once stiffly. I heard him, she said. I just decided it was the wrong choice. Cole exhaled softly. From his side, it looks different, he said. He read the next quote. Without Holloway moving, Sergeant Reddick and Mills do not clear the structure before collapse, he recited. Multiple survivors credit Holloway with dragging them past last stable wall. The room seemed smaller for a moment, the walls closer. Grace stared at the words. Dragged is a very generous verb, she said quietly. There was a lot of stumbling. The floor did not file a complaint, Cole said. He let the silence sit, not rushing to fill it. Grace traced a line along the edge of the paper with one finger, careful not to touch the blacked-out sections. What are you trying to do? She asked finally. Prove that a report can make it sound clean. No, he said. I'm trying to make sure you know the version that made it into the archive is not the one where you failed everyone. She looked up at him. In their version, Mole, he continued, you followed a direct order under impossible conditions and got as many people out as physics allowed. You did not abandon anyone. You did not decide who lived. I left him, she said. No, Cole said. He chose to stay. He did not get to live with that choice, she said. That is true, he replied. You did, which is why you twisted it until it sat on your chest instead of his. Her jaw clenched. You sound very sure, she said. I read a lot of reports, he answered. I listened to how people talk about themselves in the years afterward. There are patterns. He folded his hands on the table, fingers lacing. One pattern is this, he said. The people who had no choices blame themselves the most. The ones who had plenty sometimes blame everyone else. Which one am I? She asked. You had one choice, he said. Stay and die in a hallway that was already coming down or move and try to keep a pulse in anyone you could reach. He inclined his head toward the paper. The record says you chose option 2, he said. She let out a breath that trembled slightly at the end. And you? She asked. Well, what did you choose? In that op-ed, he said. I chose an office 3 buildings away in a country with central heating. His voice held no pride in that. No shame either, just fact. I was not there, he said. I saw it through feeds and transcripts, which is exactly why I keep the words from the people who were. He tapped the quote again. He ordered you out, Cole said. He did the math in his head that you keep doing in yours, and he put himself on the side of the equation he knew he was not walking away from. He leaned back slightly. You do not have to like that, he added. You just have to recognize that you did not overwrite his choice. Grace sat very still. Something inside her had the sensation of a door that had been barred for a long time. The wood had warped around the lock. The hinges had rusted. Now, under repeated pressure from both sides, it creaked, not quite open, but no longer sealed. He died, she said. Yes, Cole said. They nearly did, she added. Noah, Mills, Reyes. And they did not, Cole said. Because you moved. She looked back down at the paper at her own name. Holloway Grace M. status survived. The line had been corrected recently. A note in the margin marked the change from presumed KIA to present. Fresh ink over old assumption. She noticed another annotation, a small star next to her name. What is that? She asked. Cole followed her gaze. Anchor, he said. The word sat heavy. You used it in the hall, she said. You said people pay attention to their anchors. He nodded. In messy operations, he said, certain individuals become points we tie our understanding to. You pull 6 people out of a collapse, you become one of those. That does not obligate me to be anything now, she said. No, he said. It does not obligate you. It does explain why your reappearance has people above my desk rearranging their expectations. She closed the folder and pushed it back toward him. So that is what this is, she said. Expectations. It is acknowledgement, he said. And yes, expectation. He let that land without dressing it up. You have options, he said. More than you think. Such as, she asked. You can stay exactly where you are, he said. Work your shifts, take care of sprains and crash codes, go home, sleep, repeat. No one is going to drag you back into a uniform by force. He set his hand lightly on the folder. Or, he said, you can let us formally recognize what you clearly still carry. She frowned. Recognize how? She asked. Advisory roles, he said. Training, tactical medicine instruction. You already did half a workshop in that CT suite. She thought of Jamie, eyes wide, as he watched her push the needle into Noah's chest, of Lang, the reluctant nod. We have young teams rotating through scenarios based on reports like this one, Cole continued, tapping the folder. They learn from sanitized versions. You could help unsanitize them. Make them real without putting yourself on a plane. The idea settled in the air between them. Not sharp, not soft, heavy. She pictured a room of trainees, mannequins on tables, whiteboards with diagrams. Her voice explaining patterns of blast and pressure and how to tell when a patient was drowning from the inside. Her stomach fluttered. I still work here, she said. You can do both, he said. Or neither. I am not a recruiter. I am a messenger. You brought me a file and a status I did not ask for, she said. And I'm telling you what some people hope you might be willing to do with them, he replied. He spread his hands slightly. You get to decide, he said. That is more than some people got. That last sentence sat in the room like a stone. She thought of Carter of Russ, of nights in sand and concrete, of Noah in the ICU breathing under soft light, of the hiss of air leaving his chest through a needle. Her fingers flexed on the edge of the table. What if I say no? She asked. Then we adjust our maps, he said. And you go back to your board and your patients and your life. What if I say yes? She asked. Then we schedule conversations in smaller rooms than this one, he said, with people who have more paperwork than I did. She almost smiled at that picture. Rooms full of binders and acronyms. The part of her that had once spent hours decoding briefings stirred, then settled. He stood picking up the folder. I am not asking you for an answer tonight, he said. You have had enough new information for one shift. She rose as well. You seem very sure I'm not going to simply tear that envelope up, she said. He looked at her pocket where the outline of the paper made a faint shape. You put it away, he said, not in the trash. He opened the door, then paused with his hand on the frame. For what it is worth, he said, the men whose names are black on that page did not talk about you like a mistake. He met her eyes. They talked about you like a reason they were still breathing long enough to write the report, he said. Then he stepped out into the hallway. Grace stood alone in the small room. The hum of the fridge filled the quiet. A vending machine in the corner rattled softly as its compressor kicked on. She reached into her pocket and pulled the envelope out again. The paper inside was warm now, from her body heat. She did not open it this time. She did not need to. The words were already written somewhere behind her eyes. Reactivated. Anchor. She slid the envelope into her bag instead of her pocket, a small, decisive shift. Not on display, not trashed, kept. Then she turned off the break room light and walked back toward the nurse's station, where monitors beeped and call lights blinked and a board full of names waited for whatever part of her was ready to step up to each line. The rest of the night moved in fits and starts. Grace checked, vitals changed dressings, reassured a teenager who had dislocated his shoulder in a pickup game and was convinced it would never be the same. She watched the hands on the clock crawl toward the end of her shift. Every so often she glanced at the elevator that led up to the ICU. Twice she called upstairs to ask for updates. Lucy answered both times. The first call she said he was stable. The second she said he was asking for coffee and had been told no, which she took as a positive sign. By the time the sky outside the narrow ER windows had softened from black to a dull charcoal, the waiting room had emptied and started to refill again. The night crew and the early morning crew overlapped in a familiar tangle. New nurses clocked in rubbing sleep from their eyes. Residents traded patient lists and complaints about how long the night had felt. Grace finished charting on her last assigned case and logged out of the computer. Her body ached in the places it always did at the tail end of a shift. Shoulders, lower back, the space behind her eyes. She was about to head toward the locker room when Marta caught her sleeve. Hold up, Marta said, before you vanish into the land of vending machine breakfast. Grace paused. What now? She asked. Field trip, Marta said. Grace frowned. I have been on enough of those for a lifetime, she said. This one has better lighting, Marta replied, and fewer explosions. She jerked her chin toward the elevators. ICU wants to see us, she said. Plural. Lang asked for trauma staff. Park waved his hands around and said something about teachable moments and interdisciplinary respect. I stopped listening, but there was coffee. The idea of walking back into the ICU as part of a group felt different from slipping in alone, less intimate, more exposed. Do I have a choice? Grace asked. You always have a choice, Marta said. You also have about 10 people upstairs who watched a man try to climb off an operating table when your name was mentioned. They want the visual to go with the legend. Legend, Grace repeated. That is excessive. Tell that to the resident who tried to draw your decompression on a napkin, Marta said. Come on. You look like you could use a chair that is not in a hallway. In the end, it was easier to go with the current than to fight it. They stepped into the elevator with 2 residents, a respiratory tech, and one of the security officers from earlier, the one who had sprinted into Trauma 2 with a granola bar in his hand. His name tag read Darius. He avoided Grace's eyes until the doors closed, then glanced up. You were right, he said. About what? She asked. About letting go of his arm, Darius said. He did not swing at me after that. There was relief in his voice and a hint of pride. Thank you for not tasing my patient, she said. He huffed a short laugh. Not on my list of top 5 things to do, he answered. The doors opened to the 3rd floor. The ICU hallway was busier now than it had been in the quiet middle of the night. Day shift nurses had arrived. Voices moved in low waves. The city beyond the windows had brightened by a shade. Lucy stood outside room 7, hands curled around a clipboard. You brought half the ER, she said when she saw them. Lang said team, Marta replied. This is the short version. Behind Lucy through the glass, Grace could see movement. Noah propped up slightly more awake, an extra line or 2 gone from his collection of tubing. The ventilator was still absent. The oxygen was still there. Another figure stood near the foot of the bed. Cole. He caught sight of the group and stepped toward the door. His cardigan had been traded back for a jacket. His expression was composed, but there was a watchfulness in it that did not quite match a casual visit. He opened the door wider. Come in, he said. They filed in, filling the available floor space. Nurses, residents, Darius with his hands tucked carefully at his sides. Even Lang appeared slipping in at the last moment with a cup of coffee and a stiff set to his shoulders, as if someone had dragged him by professional obligation. Noah looked up at the influx. His eyes blinked a couple of times, clearing. Morning, he said, voice rough but stronger. The word sounded strange and right at once. His gaze found Grace in the cluster almost immediately. It skimmed past Lang, past Jamie, past the faces he did not know, and locked on her as if his eyes had been tracking her the entire time. You are popular, he said. Most of them came for the coffee, she said. Jamie coughed, trying to hide a smile. Cole moved to one side of the bed, making a small gesture with his hand that suggested he was rehearsing lines in his head, even as he spoke. Captain Reddick asked to address the team, Cole said. I told him we could gather some of you. You outperformed the sample size. Lang took a sip of his coffee, eyeing Cole over the rim. This is irregular, Lang said. Most worthwhile things are, Cole replied. He stepped back, ceding the attention to Noah. Noah shifted slightly, grimacing as his shoulder reminded him of its existence. He adjusted, finding a position that did not pull on the sutures. He looked tired, pale around the edges, but there was a focused steadiness in his gaze that carried into his voice. I am not great at speeches, he said. That is all right, Marta said. We are great at pretending to listen. A low ripple of amusement moved through the room. It loosened the tension by a notch. Noah let the corner of his mouth lift. Fair, he said. I will keep it short. He looked at Lang first. You cut me open, he said. You put things back where they were supposed to be. I do not take that for granted. Lang shifted, caught off guard by the direct acknowledgement. It is what I do, Lang said. You did it well, Noah replied. His gaze moved to Jamie. You, he said. Thank you for not letting protocol kill me. Jamie's ears turned a shade pink. I almost did, Jamie said. She told me not to. He tipped his head toward Grace. Noah's eyes followed. Which brings me to the main point, he said. The hum of machines and the soft shuffle of shoes seemed to fall further away. When I woke up downstairs, Noah said I was not here. He did not elaborate. He did not have to. Enough people in the room had seen patients fight invisible battles. I was halfway back in a place that did not have clean floors or bright lights, he continued. I did not know any of your faces. I did not care about your names. He took a breath. Then someone said 6 words that should not mean anything to anyone in this building, he said. Except me. He looked at Grace. Raven 3 echo fall, he said aloud. The sound seemed to vibrate against the glass. No one in this room is supposed to know that phrase, he went on. No one in this hospital. It is tied to one night, one mess, one set of people. He paused. One medic, he said. Grace felt every eye shift her way, the glance that landed, and then skittered away again, as if staring would break whatever balance held the scene together. I spent 5 years believing that Medic died, Noah said. We carved her name on a wall. We saluted her when we met. We raised glasses to her and told stories about how she yelled at us while dragging us away from bad decisions. A ghost of a grin touched his mouth. Turns out, he said, we were toasting the wrong thing. He pushed himself a little more upright. Lucy moved to adjust the pillows without being asked, finding the angle that let him sit without tearing anything. He lifted his left arm. The good one. There were ivy lines attached tape on the back of his hand. He moved slowly, each inch deliberate. Every soldier in the room, former or current, knew what he was about to do before his hand reached his brow. He saluted. It was not regulation perfect. His shoulder protested, his fingers trembled, and the hospital gown took something away from the formality. It did not matter. He held the salute with his eyes on Grace. For the record, he said, voice clear, carrying just enough to reach everyone. This hospital did not save my life tonight. He let the words hang for a beat. Grace Holloway did, he finished. Again, silence pressed in thick and absolute. No one moved. No one whispered. Even the monitor seemed to soften its beep as if it understood that sound would break something important. Grace felt heat crawl up her throat. Not embarrassment. Something older. Her instinct was to step back, to slide behind the others and let the moment pass over her head. She stayed where she was. Her spine straightened without her permission. Her hands unfolded at her sides. Her gaze met his and held. Around them the room seemed to narrow to a long, quiet tunnel. She lifted her hand, not to her brow, not a mirrored salute. She raised it halfway, fingers open, palm angled toward him in a small, precise tilt. An acknowledgement, not of rank, of recognition. Noah dropped his hand, the motion careful. He exhaled. Cole watched the exchange with a stillness that gave away more than any words could have. Marta wiped at the corner of one eye, pretending something had gotten in it. Darius shifted his weight, jaw working as if swallowing back something he did not want to say out loud. Jamie looked at Grace like he was trying to memorize the outline of her face for later, to file it next to the image of her with a needle in Noah's chest. Lang cleared his throat. I owe you an apology, he said, the words abrupt, as if they had been sitting behind his teeth waiting for any opening. Grace turned her head toward him. For assuming your experience based on your badge, he said. For nearly overriding you when I should have been listening. The admission cost him. That much was obvious. It also landed with a weight that shifted the room another few degrees. You did not know, she said. I did not ask, he replied. He ran a thumb along the seam of his coffee cup. If you are willing, he went on, I would like you to help us review our trauma protocols. Clearly there are gaps between what we think we know and what you have seen. Marta let out a low whistle. Careful, she said lightly. You might be giving her ideas. Grace felt the attention settle on her again. She thought of Cole's folder and the word anchor, of the envelope in her bag, of Noah's salute. If we do that, she said slowly, we do it together. Every badge, every shift. No more assuming the quiet ones have nothing to add. Jamie nodded immediately. Deal, he said. Lucy raised her hand from the other side of the bed. Agreed, she said. Darius tilted his head in assent. Even Lang, after a heartbeat, gave a small firm nod. The tension that had held the room taut loosened. People breathed again. The murmur of small side comments started up at the edges, gentle and respectful, not the earlier whispers of disbelief. Noah settled back against his pillows, eyes heavier now. That is my cue to pass out, he said. You finally taking my advice? Grace asked. Do not get used to it, he said. She let herself smile just enough for him to see it. Lucy clapped her hands softly. All right, she said. Visiting time over. This is still an ICU, not a theater. There was a low ripple of amusement as people began to file out. Grace lingered a moment longer at the side of the bed. Noah's eyes had already closed, his breathing easing into a regular pattern. She did not touch him this time. She just watched, letting the image fix itself. Then she turned and joined the others in the hallway where the light was a little brighter and the air felt different, as if something unspoken had shifted from burden to shared knowledge. The ICU doors closed behind them with a soft hydraulic sigh. For a moment, the group lingered in the hallway. People shifted, cleared throats, tried to decide whether to crack one more joke or let the quiet stand. A pager went off down the corridor and broke the pause. Duty called everyone back to their own corners of the hospital. Back to the mines, Marta said, stretching her shoulders. Come on, Holloway, before someone realizes we are loitering without a patient. They took the elevator down together. The ride was short and silent, but the silence felt different now. Less like something heavy sitting on their chests, more like collective exhale. The doors opened on the noise of the ER. Day shift had fully taken over. The air smelled of coffee and disinfectant, and a hint of burned toast from the cafeteria. Marta peeled off toward a crying toddler. Darius headed for security. Jamie stopped at the board to argue good-naturedly with another resident about who would take which consults. Grace found herself back at the nurse's station. Lang stood there, sorting through a stack of forms. He looked up when she approached. Holloway, he said. His tone was neutral, careful. Doctor, she replied. He set the forms down. I am serious about the protocols, he said. We build them on what we know. Clearly, your framework is wider in some areas. She thought of the CT suite, of his hand around the defibrillator paddles, of the thin hiss of air when the needle went in. I can bring a few ideas, she said. You can bring more than that, he answered. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a copied blank of the hospital's trauma checklist. He slid it across the counter to her. "Start here," he said. "Write what you would want to see on this if you were the one coming through the doors with half a building still in your lungs." His eyes held hers. "I will listen," he added, "even if I do not like all of it." That she knew was no small promise from him. She nodded. "I will think about it," she said. He grunted in acknowledgement and stepped away, already halfway into his next case. Grace unfolded the checklist. Shazam. The boxes and headings sat in neat rows: airway, breathing, circulation, disability, exposure. She saw the places where another line could go: blast pattern indicators, rapid assessment of tension signs, behavioral cues for combat flashbacks. She folded the paper again and tucked it into her pocket next to the ghost of the envelope. Her shift technically ended 20 minutes later. Marta shooed her off the floor with a firm wave. "Go home," Marta said. "Before someone remembers you can start IVs in your sleep." "I cannot," Grace said. "You could," Marta answered. "Do not tempt fate." Grace washed her hands one last time, the water warm, the splash familiar. She changed in the locker room, trading scrubs for jeans and a soft, worn sweatshirt. Her badge went into her bag. The envelope rustled faintly when it shifted. Outside, the air felt cooler than it had during the storm. The sky had lightened to a pale gray washed with thin clouds. The parking lot glistened in spots where puddles still clung to low spots in the asphalt. She crossed to her car keys in hand. The vehicle smelled faintly of old coffee and the pine tree air freshener that had been hanging from the mirror long enough to look ironic. The drive home was short. Houston slid past the windows in chunks: overpass, strip mall, a small park that still held drops of water on its swings. Her apartment building was plain brick, 3 stories with a narrow stairwell that always carried a hint of someone else's cooking. She climbed to the second floor and unlocked her door. The space inside was quiet, the kind of quiet that waited rather than pressed. A small couch, a low table, a television that rarely turned on, the kitchen tucked into one corner, a single plant on the sill that had somehow not died. She dropped her bag on the chair by the door and stood still for a moment, listening to the absence of monitors. Her body expected noise. When it did not come, her shoulders slumped. She went to the kitchen and poured herself a glass of water. The tap ran clear and cold. She drank half in one go, leaned her hip against the counter, and let the day replay in fragments. Noah on the gurney, fighting ghosts. Her own voice saying words she had sworn never to use again. The hiss of air leaving his chest. The look in his eyes when he realized she was not dead. Cole's folder. The quotes about Russ, about orders, about math done in a collapsing building. The salute. She set the glass down and went to the bedroom. The room was small: a bed, a dresser, a narrow closet. She knelt beside the bed and reached under it, fingers searching for the familiar cardboard edge. The box scraped softly as she pulled it out. It was not large. The lid had been taped and then retaped over the years. She had written nothing on the outside. It did not need a label. She sat cross-legged on the floor and peeled the tape back. Inside were things she had not looked at in a long time. A folded uniform shirt, the fabric faded at the seams. The patch with the small red cross edges frayed where it had been torn free. A name tape with Holloway stitched in dark letters. A worn black bracelet, simple elastic threaded through a small metal tag. There were initials on the tag: CR-RH. She ran her thumb over each one. Carter, Russ. She lifted the tag. It was cool against her skin, solid. Beneath that, a stack of photographs. Grainy shots of faces in bad lighting. Dust and laughter caught on film. A helmet perched at an angle that had once made her roll her eyes. An arm thrown over a shoulder. Men and women with tired eyes and crooked smiles. She let herself look at each one. There they were, younger. Alive. In the bottom corner of one, she spotted herself, half-turned, mouth open as if mid-command, a roll of bandage in her hand. The medic caught in the act of telling someone what to do. She had packed these things away in a hurry, once as if sealing them into a box would keep the years from reaching her. Now sitting on the bedroom floor with a city humming outside and a hospital still ticking over a few miles away, the distance felt different. She reached into her bag and took out the envelope. The paper was creased now where she had folded it. She did not open it. She did not need to read the words again. She placed it in the box on top of the photographs, but under the bracelet, sliding it into a space that had been empty until today. The old and the new sat together without protest. She rested her hands on the edge of the box for a moment, fingers spanning the cardboard. Her palms felt warm from the connection. The medic and the nurse, the ghost and the woman who walked fluorescent floors, they had always been the same person. She had just spent a long time pretending they were not. She closed the box lid gently without tape this time. When she pushed it back under the bed, it went easily as if it knew it might come out again. Back in the living room, she sank onto the couch. Her phone buzzed on the table. A new message. Unknown number, but the area code was familiar. She opened it. From Cole Everett. Text on the screen. Captain Reddick's afternoon update, vitals improving. Arm function expected with time and therapy. Also, he is still asking for coffee. A second line appeared as she watched. Separate note, if you decide to scribble on that checklist Lang gave you, I would be interested in seeing a copy. She stared at the words. Her thumbs hovered over the screen. Finally, she typed, back. Noted. Then after a beat, tell him he can have coffee when his heart agrees. 3 dots pulsed for a moment, then Cole's reply. I will pass along the condition. Welcome back to the bored Holloway. She set the phone down. The apartment was still quiet, but now in that quiet, she could almost hear something else. Not rotors, not explosions, not the frantic alarm of a crashing monitor. A steady, measured beat. Her own heart, not racing, not flat, just present, holding its line. Outside the window, the clouds thinned. A patch of lighter sky showed through, tinged with the faintest wash of blue. Grace sat there for a long time, letting her muscles unwind, her mind drift, her breath come and go. When she finally stood, the day had shifted another inch forward. She grabbed a pen from the counter, pulled the folded trauma checklist from her pocket, and set it on the table. The paper looked small. The space between the printed lines looked wide. She uncapped the pen and bent over the page. On the margin next to breathing, she wrote 3 words in neat, firm letters. Watch for tension. Her hand did not shake. She paused, then added another note farther down. Listen before you shock. The pen tip scratched lightly on the paper. She put the pen down and looked at what she had written. It was not a full protocol. It was not a complete map. It was a start, the kind you made when you knew the terrain was rough and the weather was unpredictable, but you had walked it before and were willing finally to admit that meant something. In the distance, faint and almost imagined, she could hear the echo of a monitor's steady beep, the sound she had chased all night. Alive. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts. So feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.